Welcome. The strategic forum is not yet over. So what you've come to listen to and learn more about is something that affects all of you, everyone here, energy, and where we have been, where we're going. What I've asked each of the panelists to say is what they do, so you have a clarity of where they're coming from. I'm Nick Gowing. I've been coming to the forum for several years now, delighted to be here. So let's, as you can see, the great thing is we've got equal numbers here, 3 men, 3 women. Remember that, that's important, given that there have been a lot of panels with far more men than women, and sometimes no women. That's really important in this day and age. So let me immediately go to one of the women who's come from Ukraine. Olga, tell us what you do. That's all I want to hear from you at the moment.
Hi everyone, my name is Olha Boiko. I'm a coordinator of Climate Action Network Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia, and I'm based in Kyiv, Ukraine, in a Ukrainian NGO called Eco Action, where we deal with climate change and energy issues, energy transition of coal towns, stable agriculture, sustainable agriculture. And I'm actually here instead of my colleague who is the head of energy department, Konstantin Krynitsky. He's a male, as you can guess by the name, and he unfortunately could not get a permission to leave the country because of the martial law. That's something that the men from 18 to 60 need to do. So I was supposed to be here anyway, at a different panel though, but I'm happy to elaborate on the connection between climate, civil society and energy at this panel.
Thanks, Olga. Tina.
Yes, hello, I'm a policymaker. I'm a state secretary, which is sort of a deputy minister at the Climate Ministry of Republic of Slovenia. I'm responsible for energy and mobility and also EU funding.
Thank you very much indeed. Tina. You've given me your details. Anna.
So I'm Anna Stanič. I'm a lawyer based in London, otherwise of Slovene, Australian, British and Croatian origin.
That's 4 nationalities.
That's 4, hopefully 4 passports soon, currently 3. And I do practice primarily in energy law, environmental law and European law.
But what's the connection to energy?
Well, I do.
What do you do?
So I'm an energy lawyer. I advise on large energy infrastructure projects, but I also advise on EU policy and international law relating to energy and geopolitics, I guess.
Thank you. Dejan.
Hi, my name is Dejan Paravan. I'm CEO of GEN Group. GEN Group is the 2nd largest energy producer and the biggest energy supplier in Slovenia. What distinguishes us is that we produce actually 99% of electricity CO2-free, and what we supply is everything CO2-free. We are also an important energy trader in European market, and out of this core business, what we gain, our goal is to invest in future, in green transition, and here are 2 pillars. One is nuclear, new build, and the other is renewables and flexibility and storage.
Thanks. Bart.
My name is Bart Hoevers. I'm representing ENSOG, the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas. It's established under European law to coordinate the European transmission infrastructure for gas, and for example, over the last year we've been intensely involved in mapping how the security of supply of gas looks like and what good policy measures would be, and we have intense contact on that with the European Commission, and we're based in Brussels.
Thank you very much indeed. I thought I'd look for a baseline by which we can judge what has happened in the last year. So I've turned to the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook, so bear with me for a couple of minutes, because the language is really important here, because I've asked them to give an audit of where they think we are a year on from this. This is a year ago. The world is in the midst of its first global energy crisis, a shock of unprecedented breadth and complexity, their words. Pressures in markets predated Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but Russia's actions have turned a rapid economic recovery from the pandemic, which strained all manner of global supply chains, including energy, into full-blown energy turmoil. Prices for spot purchases of natural gas have reached levels never seen before. The crisis has stoked inflationary pressures and created a looming risk of recession, as well as a huge US $2 trillion windfall for fossil fuel producers. The heaviest burden for all of this, though, is falling on poorer households. 75 million people who recently gained access to electricity are likely to lose the ability to pay for it. The total number of people worldwide without electricity access is rising. Now, these are the questions which they were raising a year ago, which are at the heart of what I want to hear their answers to in a few minutes. Is the crisis a boost or a setback for energy transition? With energy markets remaining extremely vulnerable, today's energy shock is a reminder of the fragility and unsustainability of our current energy system. A key question for policymakers is whether the crisis will be a setback for clean energy transitions or will catalyse faster action. So that's the kind of framework for the next hour. Policy responses are fast-tracking the emergence of a clean energy economy. So let me ask each of you to give your version and your view of what has happened in the last year and where we are. So Dejan, can I come to you first, as someone who has to deal with this on a day-by-day basis?
Okay, so I think that we already forgot what was the situation 1 year ago. So it was good. It was good that you read all that.
Do you remember those days?
I remember very well those days. Yeah. So my memory is still very fresh. And 1 year ago, we were faced with huge fear of security of supply, and this reflected through prices. And that's why also when the prices blew out, of course, it hurt a lot of people. Now, 1 year ahead of that event, at least if we look at Europe, because what you read was reflected to the whole global situation. Yeah? And in whole global situation, I think that it is actually from region to region different how specific regions went through this crisis or through this shift of energy flows or the energy map of the whole global economy.
But broadly, is there a new stability, or are you still feeling there is a shock of unprecedented breadth and complexity?
It was something that we haven't seen so far, but I think that at least Europe, we have 1 year ahead, we have secure supply, so everybody had electricity and gas. We paid huge money for that, so it costed a lot, but we somehow survived. And from that reason, I think that the whole situation that we were faced in the last year is a reminder and a boost for the transition, because apparently how the whole setting was 1 year ago was, at least for us, was not optimal, and we needed to pay that.
But again, for a question for all of you, is there a new stability in which we can have a degree of confidence?
Not yet. Not yet at all.
But you're seeing the same problem with distribution.
Yeah, when I look at the year back, I always take the picture in mind of the front page of The Economist with a half-frozen Europe done by Putin, so to say, to remember what was expected at that time, with gas consumption in Europe 40% dependent on being supplied by Russia, now being down to 5%. So I would take the other angle in saying that we realized more stability. The enormous price increase last year was in August, not a typically heavy month for gas, I would say, but only to prepare for the filling in winter. And now we are already at over a 90% filling level in Europe. So, of course, we are more stable now also because of demand reduction. Price-sensitive Dutch consumers, I'm quite proud of them, reduced their demand by 20 to 25%, but it's detrimental to heavy industry.
Even if it's tough, and the prices are tough, the costs are tough, is there at least stability or not?
I would say there is stability at a situation you don't want to be if you are a heavy consumer of, for example, industry. But we are in a stable situation.
There's stability at a situation which you don't want to be at. What does this mean for consumption? Because already the signs are the data is showing a year on there's significant increase in fossil fuels.
Yep, so it's an increase in coal consumption,
Yep.
and I think the challenge that we still didn't manage, I think, sufficiently is to move sufficient funds and attention to renewables. Because it's basically the reduction in gas utilization is replaced by coal. So that's not a situation you want. It's also not a situation that you want to be not competitive with your industry. So we should really, I think, at European level, think of alternatives. And it could be alternatives that we are not that good in industry that is hugely dependent on energy, because we don't have that much energy, but we should have a plan.
So you have at least one message. We have stability, but not at a level that makes people feel comfortable, and it's going to be a test as well. Let me go to Tina. What comes across your desk? What kind of judgments are you making for a country of 2 million people? You need to press your button.
Maybe if I focus first on the European level, I think the most important that we learned in the last year, and that's why I would argue that there is stability today, is that the European leaders delivered. We were faced in an unprecedented crisis with a really tough situation around us. So the European leaders were adopting quick decisions and effective decisions, and that is a clear message for the future, for next winter.
Were you surprised at the speed at which they adopted their measures?
I mean, of course, I know I was part of the decision-making process, so maybe on the gas, of course, I agree, it could be delivered a bit quicker than in December. But still, a lot of measures were adopted and they were effective, and this is what we see today. And we did good. I mean, overall, a year after, I think we are much better off than we were last summer. We massively decreased basically our consumption of natural gas. We also decreased oil and natural gas to imports. We didn't turn back. We didn't do a U-turn, what everybody was predicting, that we will turn back to the fossil fuels. Not really. This is clearly now shown through the statistics that we did manage to, despite everything what was going on, we did manage to push down the emissions. And as I said before, we did deliver a unified unified front against what was ahead of us.
Ultimately, you have to inform your ministers and the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. What kind of recommendation or analysis at the moment are you giving about what Slovenia now faces and Europe faces over the next 6 to 9 months?
I mean, we're still not out of the woods yet, I would say. I mean, things can still...
What do you mean by that?
I mean, things can still go very wrong. We are now looking at the winter, for example. The gas market can explode again. I mean, we could be facing a difficult winter if the temperature, if we have a very cold winter, if the demand, if the global demand is higher than what is now projected, if the Russian supplies go down again, if something happens in the countries that sort of jumped in and supplied the alternative part of the gas. Things can go wrong. Also on the electricity market, we are heavily dependent on, I mean, the EU is still heavily dependent on the Russian nuclear fuel. And we are faced with a very unpredicted regime there. So if something goes wrong now, today, things can escalate and we can be faced with another energy crisis in the next winter or the next 12 months, so to say. But I am confident the European leaders will deliver a joint management of this crisis.
Dejan and Bart, I have to come back to you in a moment about what you're assessing on risk and resilience and what the unthinkable, unpalatable options are of what could be coming down the track. I give you notice of that question. Anna, what's your judgment about what your clients are saying?
Okay, well, I would start by saying that energy security, if you want to quote the IEA, is about uninterrupted energy supply at affordable prices. So affordable prices part of energy security. So we are certainly nowhere near in that situation. So we are facing quite likely, as the IEA says, at least a 27 BCM lack of gas this year. And that's assuming that we don't have a very cold winter, but a normal winter. and that's including that the Russian gas continues to flow. The prices that our industry and that our economies are facing at this point is a structural uncompetitiveness that we now have built in to our pricing, and that pricing will remain. And the reason why that is that we are now buying LNG, and we're buying it primarily from the United States, and LNG prices are priced in Henry Hub plus liquefaction plus transport. Henry Hub, it means that the price the US pays is Henry Hub, and we pay liquefaction plus transport. As of today, that means that US industry pays $3 maximum. We pay $13 maximum. Now, if we reverse back and we go back to 2019, when the LNG market was delivering us important liquidity into the market, not thanks to the European Union and the governments, but because that's how the LNG market worked. And we talked about the market, as I believe it's the market that delivered the situation last year, not the government, and I can explain that as well. But in 2019, we had a parity between the prices that European industry paid and what the US industry paid. It was 1-to-1. We are now talking about 26% of the price we pay is what the industry in the United States pays. Now, that's unsustainable disadvantage, uncompetitiveness. Now, you can say, as many people in energy transition say, well, we just give up. We don't need industry. Yes, but for example, in Slovenia, about half of our population works in industry. So saying that is a bit of a risk to take, because unless we find them employment, we are in a serious situation. So energy security is about affordability of prices. And my point is, we're not out of the woods on physical flows, and we are structurally uncompetitive going forward. Now, we have signed, going forward, 15-year contracts for LNG. So we are setting that uncompetitiveness in stone post-2030. Post-2030 is when we were supposedly transitioning out of gas. But our companies are now beholden to certain pricing of gas, which if they renege on those contracts, like reneging on the Russian contracts, requires payments. So I'll stay there, but I think there's a lot there.
We don't have any politicians to work out how this is going to be managed. But let me just pick up, and Ola, if you can just stand by one moment, because obviously in Ukraine you have a particular series of unpleasant variables. But let me just come back to something underpinning all of this. If the price is going up, even if it's stable, what kind of change in behavior and consumption patterns have you seen? Is there a significant drop-off, whether it be corporate, industrial, or private?
Mm-hmm. In Slovenia, the data for the first 6 months or first 7 months of this year, we already have this data, show that in big industry, really the biggest, the drop is about 18%.
1/8.
1/8. In medium industry and business customers, it's around 10, while in households is somehow 0 or even a small increase. Why is this? This is because of the particular situation in Slovenia and regulation, because in Slovenia the government adopted regulation of retail prices for households. They were kept at quite low basis, so actually they protected the public. And this is the reason also why there was no such effect in terms of lowering the demand as it was, or as we can see it in business and especially industry customers.
Bart, same question. Change in behavior, change in consumption patterns.
Yeah, you see it all over Europe. I think the average
what kind of numbers?
The average is over 15%. I think of which my country, the Netherlands, is heading with 25%. But we tend to be historically a gas country with cheap gas. And now big industries like refineries are taking their production elsewhere. So they are hit the hardest, I think. And in consumption, I think it's basically following the price incentives that are there. And I think we should also be aware that there was a complaint, I think 3 years ago, that gas and oil were much too cheap to allow for sustainables to kick in. So I think it's important that people who cannot afford the high energy bills, of course, are supported, but also good to have an incentive for those who can afford to go the more sustainable way, I would say.
Let me remind you that we're talking about securing energy security. So that's at the heart of where we want to get to by the end of this panel. Do we really have security? Tina, what kind of, ultimately, you serve your political masters who have to make political decisions, but what kind of changes, if any, are you seeing in consumption patterns and behavior?
Well, there's still some way to go, that's true. But what I would argue is that our input dependency is our vulnerability, which means that going back to the core problem, the green transition answers all these questions. So what we need to do is to drive forward the green transition. We need to drive forward the boost of domestic low carbon production. That's the only way forward, basically, to shelter our people, to shelter our economies, to lower our vulnerability to the instabilities that happen globally. And the only way we can do that is by domestic low carbon energy production. And we are doing quite well, I think, on the power sector. Europe is doing well. Overall, Europe still has a long way to go in the industrial sector, in heating sector, and in transport sector especially. For example, in Slovenia, half of our emissions come from the use of oil derivatives, so it's clear where we need to work on. And of course, we 100% import all the energy. It's the same in industry. So what we need to do is speed up on the renewables especially, and not just in the power sector. And what we are faced with, and I think what is also a European problem when at the end of the day, is this myth, this belief that the renewables clash against the nature conservation, which I think we will need to address very quickly and very effectively at the European level when it comes to the policy making. So renewables are not endangering nature. They are its savior, so to say. And our inability to move quickly, inability to remove administrative burdens, inability to fight against, or just there's a lot of course, resistance towards the green transition in, I think, all of our countries. So this is not facing the reality. Green transition is our future energy security, and that's clear.
Well, I'll pick that up with Olga in a moment, because we were talking about your own background, particularly on climate, as opposed to energy directly. Anna, quickly, from your point of view, again, what do you see, what do you hear about a change in behavior or not? Because I'm very struck by the IEA oil market report just out. World oil demand is scaling record highs. In other words, we're consuming more and more. Even though there's the pressure of sustainability, we've got to reduce emissions by 42% by 2030. Ideally, if COP28 comes through in the way that the UAE wants to get an outcome. So, where do you see behaviour and conduct in this?
Well, I think I'm less worried about behaviour, because behaviour is talking about individuals. I think I mean, I'm more concerned about industry and industry destruction. So I'm far more concerned about that and as a way going forward, and I don't see that anything is being done to address that. So on the one hand, the EU is adopting supposedly industry policies and all these kind of things. There's a complete, well, it's almost like a schizophrenic position, because on the one hand, you're adopting an industry policy, and on the other hand, we are in a situation of extremely unaffordable, as I've just explained, structurally unaffordable energy prices. So this is a serious crisis, and as I say, this winter and up until 2027, we are in physical insecurity. So we are physically insecure in our supply of gas, let alone rest. On your oil point, yes, oil demand has gone up, But that's not the only thing that's gone up. You were asking us about green transition. Coal consumption has gone up. That's far more important. Germany has just had to admit that it's going to have to pay over 15 billion worth of fines by the end of this year because of its CO2 emissions as a result of the positions that they took last year, which included continuing to shut down nuclear power stations this year. Okay? And they are going to have to find, and now this is supposedly a great idea, so they're going to find someone who's going to sell them ETS certificates in order to meet these requirements. But what does that mean for the countries that will be forced to sell? You're not selling stuff because you want to. You're going to be selling stuff because you can't afford to run your industry. So you're going to at least get some money for the fact that you've shut down your industry. But shutting down industry is shutting down your entire GDP growth. Look at where we are. We are in recession as the EU. Germany is meant to remain in recession at least till the end of this year. I would predict that the situation will be far more dire going forward. So we are in a situation that I would say is an existential crisis, driven by energy insecurity. What does it do for climate change and our commitments? Well, it just blows them out of the water. I mean, you don't want gas. And so what are you going to do? Renewables, for the reasons that Tina says, which is entirely correct, permitting takes too long. Well, we now have to deal with the situation of the next 5 years, which is, and for example, in Slovenia, they say it takes 10 years to get a permit for a solar power station or wind. I don't know if we have any wind. We have, I think, 2. So for 10 years...
13 years in the UK.
Okay, so then 10 years we're going to wait. Well, we can't wait. So climate change commitments? Well, you tell me how you do it.
Let me just go to both of you. Dejan, when you hear that, an existential crisis, is that the way you're seeing it?
Existential crisis in Europe currently? I mean, currently we have enough energy, so I don't see it so existential in terms of living like it was a year ago.
Well, have a conversation with Anna. She used the phrase.
But because we are talking all the same, yeah. But the price that is today is actually existentially critical for certain industries, and that's the point. So we have enough energy, also because it came from other countries who cannot afford globally. But at the price we are paying, which is not sustainable in the long run. So that's why we have this tricky situation, and how we shall move out from this point, yeah? Because in energy you cannot do anything over the night. Yeah? That's why, I look at the last year. Okay, we needed to survive somehow and secure the reliability of supply, and we did that. Now we need to figure it out also how we will lower the energy prices. And this is something that we haven't figured it out yet. And I cannot see it otherwise than by investing in our own sources.
But existential crisis or not?
No, I would be much more optimistic than Anna is, because I think
more optimistic or less pessimistic?
It's for me it's the same, but I tend to be optimistic. Optimism, I think, it sounds better. So the glass is half full. I think that physically we would be fine even in a cold winter, our analyzers show. And then, of course, it will be challenging to fill the storages for gas next summer. But first we have to have a very cold winter. So I think we are optimistic that we even can live it to a cold winter. Of course, the situation is more tricky because we never had price effects in Europe due to strikes in Australia or threatening strikes in Australia. But that's mainly the price effect and not the physical security, so I'm a bit of an optimist there. And I think on comparative advantages, we know we don't have them anymore. We had them on cheap Russian gas. That's over. So we have to live in a situation with more expensive energy than other countries in the Middle East, in America. That's, I would say, a fact of life, but we need to have a plan B where we are going to outperform, so to say, the others, the Chinese, the US. And that's hard because in the US they have it easier, like, for example, deciding on an Inflation Reduction Act and stimulating the economy there. So I think we should be more active to also find a competitive advantage for Europe.
Right. I'm going to open it up in a couple of minutes after a bit longer, when Olga's spoken as well. So keep the microphone, but can you attract attention and get the microphone to you? Because we have about 35 minutes to run. So I'd like you to be part of this debate because you'll have additional perspectives. Ola, what we've just been talking about must seem slightly unreal to you, given where you've come from, given where you live, and given the predicament that your country is having to face, literally day by day, hour by hour. What's your reflection on listening to this debate?
Okay, so well, first I must say that what I've learned during the year as well, like assessing the situation that we are in right now, I would say that the security or the feeling of security does not come necessarily from nothing bad happening ever again, but rather from a feeling that you can face it and you can fight it if it happens. So this is about preparation, and this is about knowing that you can respond to a crisis because it will happen. And comparing again last year with this year, obviously the discussion on energy security in Ukraine, we do have similar discussions, because for me the conversation that has been going for the past 15 minutes is about the energy security in Ukraine case of the future and of Europe. So it's a kind of a different level, while we also have another level present, of course, it's the energy security of today, because obviously from so it was October 11 when there were first like massive attacks on energy infrastructure in Kyiv including, and it has gone for almost half a year, left us without half of our energy potential, and the Kyiv School of Economics estimated around $8 to $10 billion of damage. But obviously, as the attacks were going, the rebuilding was also going on every day, and we even eventually got, I guess, after a month of these attacks since they started in October, we got a schedule, like a website where you can check when you will have the electricity and which are the hours when you will not have them. And people were, the civil society, because it's very active, they were actually unhappy when the schedule was not correct, and they were, they were criticizing, like, I do not have the electricity, I cannot plan my day. Well, that you live in a war. So this is a kind of a multi-level discussions that are happening right now, and for the future energy security of Ukraine and of Europe, because we do have the joint electricity grid, we are obviously also taking the path of green recovery, green energy reconstruction, and surprisingly, this hard winter that is definitely going to be repeated again, has shown, especially the local municipalities, because Ukraine has had a good decentralization reform, it has shown the local municipalities the exact power of renewable energy, and at least of covering the basic needs of critical infrastructure like hospitals and schools, with the ability to have the water pumps running or electricity running, etc. And the role of NGOs has been critical here as well, because during winter there's been a lot of delegations from the EU coming, from the EU Commission, helping us with the funds and with the diesel generators, etc. They were buzzing all over. If you would walk the streets, this is the sound of winter. But we, as environmental NGOs, suggested, why don't you try and help us with solar panels, for example? And there was an initiative on the Led light bulbs as well, kind of a smaller one. But the solar panels actually picked up as an idea. And starting small, of course, this is not yet a systemic solution. This is about the security of today, right? But at this level, there's been a huge change and shift in mindset and of understanding, okay, this can actually work. This is not a fairy tale that is too expensive to buy, etc. So I would say that in general, there has been a lot of shifts in mindsets, and now preparing for this winter, obviously we need to take into account that we do not have the full capacity of electricity grid still, and the biggest nuclear power plant of Europe, the Zaporizhzhia, is still occupied, so that influences a lot our capacity, but we have time to prepare. So, when you know that the disaster is coming, it kind of gives you a bit of a a bit of a feeling of this security and trying to accumulate more energy right now into the grid is what the Ministry of Energy is doing, while we are trying to get more long-term planning on renewable energy, also potentially in renewable energy production, so manufacturing in Ukraine, for example, in carbon-intensive regions. There's all these simultaneous levels that are going on, so it's not everyday doom and gloom, but obviously there's some critical things you need to think about.
Is it quite remarkable, the level of ability to get around problems that you have seen? In other words, not making up, but actually finding workarounds, finding the equipment, finding the generators, getting the fuel, given that this was not prepared for, you weren't expecting this 18 months ago. Has it been quite remarkable? Because we were talking about just the basics. You used to live in an 8th-floor flat, you now live in a 4th-floor flat. I know someone who lives in a 17th floor. That means she has to carry water up there because she doesn't dare take the elevator. Yeah. But you've got to think of those kind of things. You're not sure if you have electricity when you get to the top. Just finding ways of getting around.
And go into the elevator, yeah. Yeah, this is all true. And so the remarkable ability to recover and to respond to the challenges, etc., was not a surprise already during autumn, because this is something I've seen and I've tried to process during the first months of the full-scale invasion. And obviously working in a civil society, for me, that is the key response of how, I mentioned that the decentralization reform was also not by chance, because for me this was the key of tackling this huge, unpredictable for most of the people problem. And it's not a problem, it's multiple crises at the same time that you have to figure out what to do with. So yeah, seeing how it all works on the ground, and municipalities actually working with the civil society, I would say this is the key as well, because this was not just people running around and trying to help with whatever they have. This was also them sitting together with their mayors and the workers in the municipality to try and plan the recovery plan, or to try and prepare for the next winter, etc. So as I'm saying, this is hard. It's hard to explain in one sentence, like what is happening in Ukraine or how the situation is, like many people are asking, because there's a million things happening at the same time. And this has been like this since the 24th of February 2022, but actually before that as well. And that's exactly why we were able to survive so far as well, because you need to think on multiple levels at the same time. You need to work with people on the local level so that they do not block solutions, for example, in renewable energy, because the skepticism is there, and even inside the environmental community there are still people, of course, who are concerned with the impacts of any kind of energy source and any kind of new production that could be implemented.
Let's talk about that in a little time. Does anyone want to come in at this point? The microphone is there. Don't say that I haven't opened it up. Right. Please see this as an open invitation. Let me pick up one of the questions from the IEA. Times of crisis put the spotlight on governments and how they react. What's your feeling, Tina, about the way your government has reacted? Obviously, you're in it, so it's a bit unfair. You're going to tell me everything's gone brilliantly. But what are the gritty problems that you've had to confront, so that those outside understand the dilemmas you've had to face, the difficulties you've faced, getting data, making assumptions on behavior, etc., etc. How does a small government, react to all of this?
Nick, I could be speaking about this for 1 hour, but maybe just how I see it. If I look back, the first level, I think it was really to understand that it's a really European problem. So we are not alone, and nobody's alone, and if we don't find solutions together, we fail. We all fail. So that's the European level, where we really needed to really work very closely, intensively together, and carve out very difficult decisions. And I remember I was there. I mean, the energy ministers, they were meeting every second week, and they were like negotiating until 3-4 o'clock in the morning, continuing the next day at 6. So it was a very difficult time and very challenging. And every member state brought in a national specific. So addressing all of them and finding a balance that would serve to the European interest, not to the national one, was very difficult. At the national level, I think, well, as you predicted, of course, as a representative of our government, the newly established, we had elections last year, so the new government was put in place in June last year. It was a very difficult time. You know, there's a saying in Slovenia that you have 100 days of peace so that you find your way around and get familiar with the administrative tasks that you have to perform. Well, there were no 100 days. We were basically in the middle of the energy crisis already in June. In July, we had to adopt very difficult decisions, having a really big impact on the majority of population and, of course, economy, with very little data and very little stability and very little predictability, because the European Union was not at that point a very cohesive sort of space. So it was challenging. What we did was really we did adopt several measures. And I will not speak about them, but one pillar was the energy security, the security of supply. The second one was protecting the consumers, protecting put a pillow on the energy, on the growing energy poverty, the regulation that Dejan was mentioning. And the third one was pushing forward the energy transition, which would, not maybe immediately, but in the midterm, lessen our import dependency and our vulnerability. So these are maybe the three pillars that we had to push on very quickly, with very little data, of course, and very unstable.
Did you have a risk and resilience calculation already somewhere in a file?
No. What we discovered as a, sorry, but I have to be very honest, as a new incoming government, the previous government, probably because it was a very pre-election time in Slovenia, basically didn't prepare for the energy crisis.
Did they not believe it was going to happen or could happen?
They were probably focusing on elections, but I don't know. I've never asked. But nothing was prepared. Nothing. So
nothing?
Basically nothing, no.
Okay. Anna, what do your clients say to you about the ability of governments to handle all of this? Microphone.
I'll answer it in a different way. Energy prices, particularly gas prices, started rising already by mid-2021. So I think we need to put things in a slightly different context as to why they rose and what are the reasons. They peaked in terms of gas, I don't know about electricity, but Dejan will know, in August 2022. Now, you'd say, did something happen in August with Russia? No, actually. The reason for the peak was the fact that there was enormous pressure between March and August to fill in storage. And the situation in the market, and this is anecdotal, so I have no proof other than the fact that anecdotal evidence, but basically traders from certain countries, particularly Germany, were able to bid at whatever price. There was no limit to the price that they were prepared to pay. So they were pushing the market and the traders, of course, if you know that someone's going to pay whatever you ask, well, then they pay whatever you ask, or you ask as much as you want. Now, by the time August comes, storage is full, and therefore that pressure on the market disappears. Now, so there's no government intervention other than the government intervention that we told them back in April that would cause the price to spike was to introduce mandatory gas storage at that particular point in time. So actually the industry was saying, don't introduce gas storage mandatory then, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to create a spike in the market, you increase volatility. So even when Nord Stream is blown up in September, there's no volatility in the market. Now you'd say, oh, well, the market got used to, and it did. It got used to the fact that we could survive at some price, at that high price, which is unprecedentedly high price for basic energy consumption. Now, how did the government solve that? Well, they just threw money at us. They helped, obviously it's a good thing, it was necessary to help the populations and all that, but what did it cost us? If I put it in the context of where we were before, and that was COVID, where the European governments printed 3.1 trillion euros worth of money, representing, and this is from the IEA, 11.4% of the total annual GDPs. Okay, so that's just money that didn't exist. then just for by the end of last year, 890 billion were printed in terms of solving the situation in terms of energy. We are continuing that now. Key thing there, and this is what is concern to us, and it particularly should be of concern to Slovenia and small countries, half of that money was used in Germany because we as Slovenia, we can't afford state aid. We don't have the money, we can't borrow, so we can't give help to our industry. So we are now in a very difficult situation. As it is with energy transition, we don't have the money to help our companies' energy transition, because that is all supported by state aid. State aid is an exemption to the basic rules that have been set up to create the European Union. The European Union has been created to ensure what? Level playing field for companies, and small companies in particular, but big companies as well, to be able to have a level playing field to compete with one another. Okay, so now, if an economy like Germany is able to provide 300 billion to its industry and its economy to help them through the energy crisis, and Slovenia, I don't know, did we manage 150 million or something? What did we do?
1 billion.
1 billion, okay, but 1 billion. That's a huge difference. Okay, that's a huge difference. This is now causing a huge issue at the EU level. I mean, and this is a serious issue. It's not just a minor issue, but these are, in addition to the uncompetitiveness with respect to US and other, we are now creating inherent uncompetitiveness as a result of the inability for different governments to help their industries.
Here we are at the end of August. Do you think the pressure is still on governments? In other words, there may be a degree of complacency. I'm going to ask Dejan and Bart in a moment. What's your view?
Well, I mean, the German Minister of Economic Affairs, or I don't know what they call it, Minister of Economy, has been calling for two things. One, either to allow Germany to continue to subsidize energy prices, particularly for the energy industry, at 60 euros, or alternatively, for there to be a setup at the EU level, some sort of a mechanism that would do the same. But this is helicopter money either way. And the question is, and I repeat again, this is an existential crisis. You can't just print money in oblivion. And I know the argument in the US is that you can. Well, Mr. Gowing says you can. So we will see. But I think one other thing to add to all this, it's not just about the energy crisis. There's also the inflation. And these are two components that actually have caused problems in terms of also the viability of renewables. So we have complex situations happening, and we're only addressing one aspect of a larger problem that we have now as a result of inflation and high borrowing rates.
All right. Does anyone want to come in? Please, I'll come to you both in a moment. I'm just going to keep the microphone, but I'm just going to ask Dejan and Bart, what's your view on that question? Times of crisis put the spotlight on governments and how they react.
Yeah, I will answer that from the European perspective, because I think in the gas market you see that, of course, the European Commission wants to do things, but energy policy is up to the national governments. So that makes it very difficult, for example, setting filling levels for storage. It's up to the national governments to fill that in. And in my organization, we are, so to say, not politicians. So for us, it's, for example, very easy in case of scarcity in Europe. We just divide the scarcity amongst all countries evenly. And I think solidarity has been an important element of these days. And I think in energy perspective, Europe should still have a more common energy policy and also have more solidarity, because in case of crisis, it's up to bilateral agreements to divide the scarcity, and that's not a good idea.
Just bear in mind what Tina said, no advanced thinking. Now, I'm not going to put you on the rack here. Do you feel that governments now do have their fingers on the button and know exactly what the challenges are, what the variables are, what the dangers are politically as much as anything else?
Well, not really, I think, because in the end, I think we could even be more prepared, although I'm very, so to say, happy how we survived, so to say, the last year.
That was a year ago.
Yeah.
We've now got to look forward.
Yeah, and I think we should still think, for example, the filling levels and the targets there. I think there's no plan behind it. So I think we still living in the energy landscape based on that the European Commission believes that the market does the trick, so to say. And
no plan behind it.
And the market, of course, did the trick, because when it's becoming very expensive, you are going to save on energy. But I think you need a plan B for the situation where we're in now.
Dan, no, the spotlight on governments. Choose whichever government you want. Don't mention a government, but just give me your overall impression of the 27 or however many you want to count up.
I agree with Bart that I think that the government's a little bit sleepy because everything is...
Did you say sleepy or slippy?
That the government's a little bit sleepy because everything is fine, you know? So for that reason, I think that the governments did good job in surviving last winter. Yeah? The second task that they need to realize is how we move out of this existential crisis, as Anna said, so how we structurally change everything. But if the situation currently deteriorate, although I also think that next winter or the coming winter will not be issue in terms of security of supply, but it can affect prices and then affect the next winter. And I think if this will happen, that the governments will need to additionally react. And I don't think that there are many plans Bs in the closets. But on the other hand, it's also true that the governments now, they already did this task, and they are, I think, much more ready to solve this. Although, I also agree that you cannot print money, endlessly.
But if they've got away with it once, will they get away with it again?
Sorry?
If they got away with it once, will they get away with it again?
Yeah, I think yes. Yeah.
Right, with a smile. Right, please. Do introduce yourself, please.
My name is Miroslav Gregoric. I'm a member of Slovenian Parliament. Anna was very sober when warning that the LNG gas is 4 times more expensive now in Europe than in the competitive market in US. I'm not sure whether LNG terminal investment costs were included in these 4. And we have many new LNG terminals in Europe. Now, I'm afraid that we are locked in a geopolitical situation, and we are not looking forward enough, because there is, of course, our goal is to go hydrogen. But even if we put all our efforts there, 5 years is not enough. We will not have hydrogen to replace the methane. So, but there is plenty of gas in Algeria, in Libya, in Nigeria, in Angola, and also in Israel, in Egypt, and also in the common field between Qatar and Iran. Why are not we running into building new pipelines from these countries to Europe? And
is there anyone in the audience who builds pipelines?
Okay.
You'd build pipelines?
I just do them as a lawyer.
Right, Bart. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come back, keep the microphone there for a moment. But okay, easy to say, build pipelines.
Yeah, the short answer is that for a certain distance, it's much more economical to ship it via LNG than have a pipeline. And I think, well, recent history has learned us that a pipeline crosses several jurisdictions, so there's also an additional risk attached than go for the sailing route, I could say, from Dutch perspective.
Anna, do you want to come in on that?
Well, no, I agree with that. I would just want to say that another aspect that we haven't mentioned at all is that the amount of CO2 emissions related that's connected to LNG as opposed to piped gas. So it's about 10 times more CO2 emitting to use LNG, precisely because of tankers and then the liquefaction.
Dan.
We were 40% dependent on Russian gas with pipelines. So what's the point if we now construct a pipeline towards Qatar? I don't think that this is the solution for security.
I don't think anyone's proposing a pipeline to Qatar, are they?
Or to all these
Why not?
Well, have you looked at the map lately?
The Europe is already doing the diversification of energy sources through LNG and so on.
But this is masochistic approach.
And
I would say the one thing that I think the point is about the pipeline. We moved from having diversity of supply in terms of LNG plus pipe, where we now are effectively at LNG. That makes us much more insecure because actually the volatility and the whole idea of transportation, the supply chain of LNG is much more complex than pipeline. And anyway, the pipelines were there. So we have now moved from one dependency, if we want to talk about it in terms of gas, from pipeline dependency to an LNG dependency. So maybe I think the point that's being made is that we need to go to having a diversified,
Bart.
Yeah, I fully agree with Anna on diversification, but I think we should be a bit more optimistic because we have also pipeline gas from Norway and Africa, so there is more, so to say. And we might also remember that the Japanese used to have a flourishing economy without having natural resources that were cheaper off. So I think I'm still optimistic, even now gas is
Let me come back to you as a member of parliament. You know, you're accountable to the electorate. And given, I'm not going to give Tina a hard time here because it's a government problem as opposed to just a Slovenian problem. Do you feel vulnerable about what is coming down the track if the politicians get the calculations wrong about what is going to happen with supply?
Of course I'm worried. But, of course I'm worried. And I'm looking forward to the greenification, to have solar panels, to have wind, and to go to hydrogen. But this will all take time. And fortunately, you have seen Slovenia has a lot of wood, so we have also a lot of energy in the wood. But that's not to run our plant for aluminum. So I think
I'm just checking on the vulnerability you feel as an MP.
Yeah, we are vulnerable, of course.
Okay, who had the hand up, please? Switch the microphone across. We've got 10 minutes to run.
Theodor Prosen from Telekom Slovenia. So I have one provocative question and one from the reality. So as a telecom operator, we carry two parts of the burden. So the high price of the energy and the cleanliness of the energy. So if we want to clean our CO2 footprint, we have to buy more expensive energy, or invest in more expensive energy. So the other part is what happened to solidarity, to global solidarity, and the goal SDG number 7, clean and affordable energy throughout the world. It's Agenda 2030, and now it's 2023. So we just have 7 years, and we are dealing with securing just the energy. What about the clean energy? If you have any kind of question or suggestion, what's in front of us?
Do you think that was provocative? Because, no, I'm not being sarcastic, because in the end you're facing TCFD, you're facing the need to audit and declare. So
exactly.
You have no choice.
Exactly.
Does anyone want to come in? Dan or Tina?
We faced the energy crisis because Europe was too much dependent on fossil fuels from abroad. So in order to solve these issues, that we need to rely on our energy sources, which we can have here in Europe. And these are two main sources, according to my opinion. One is renewables and the other is nuclear, at least when it comes to electricity.
Tina?
Yeah, I very much agree. I mean, why are we even speaking about this? The recent catastrophe in Slovenia will cost us several billions of euros. I mean, if we would be smart enough 10 years ago to invest that in climate change mitigation, maybe we all, the humanity, would not be facing this problem. And I have to say, and I'm sorry also for the gas industry, but why would we be throwing today money into building new pipelines to Qatar to build another dependent relationship? Let's just throw that money into industry decarbonization. In Slovenia, for example, only through energy efficient measures, I'm repeating, only energy efficient measures, we would save more than 5 terawatt hours on a yearly basis. So, and that's much more than our nuclear power plant is, for example, producing. So there are solutions, they're already here, and let's maybe start implementing them in a climate-friendly way.
But the choice that has to be made, according to this example, is between the cheaper stuff, which is dirty, and the more expensive stuff, which is more expensive energy, which will be clean, but cost them much more and increase their costs. Tina, the dilemma about what a company has to do in facing that situation.
But I mean, they should invest. They should, if they have a perspective, a long-term perspective of surviving on this market, they should start planning decarbonization of their own use of energy. And I mean, telecom should be already doing that. So
I assume you are.
We are.
Yeah.
Of course we are.
So.
Our main source.
Take the mic.
But your main source is probably electricity. You do
It's
not
electricity,
deal with...
exactly.
Okay, so that's all the solutions are available to you, and the government is
Exactly.
giving you money to go.
It's not the point. You expressed the burden is that if we want to do this, it's much more expensive, and then we are dealing with the profitability.
Because the CO2 doesn't have the right price. Because what is the cost? What is the price of our recent flooding? Which is a direct result of climate change.
Yep.
And that can happen to us every month. So
Exactly.
every month, the Slovenia will be paying for climate change several billion euros. And I'm sure that's the same in all other countries. So what is expensive? What is expensive? Decarbonization is probably less expensive than dealing with a world that has changed to an uncontrollable way of environment around us. So we have to...
We are completely highly aware of this, and we also offer solutions to mitigate the climate changes. But on the other hand, still there's an issue about European dependency on dirty or high-priced energy. So the solution, one of the solutions probably is nuclear power plants. And this, but still, not every company could afford this.
This is a much broader issue about energy policy as opposed to energy security. So thank you. Let's leave it on the table for the moment as something which needs to be fully understood because it's coming down the track very quickly. Olha, let me come to you now because we've got about 5 minutes left. You've been sitting there patiently thinking, which world are these guys coming from, probably? And you come from a war zone, not a conflict zone, a war zone, very clearly. What's your reflection, particularly on the environmental side, given your particular specialty, which has brought you here, not necessarily energy, but climate, and support for greening, whether green hushing, green washing, or green advocacy?
I mean, energy and climate are interconnected. I've been in climate movement for 8 years. The discussion on the need for decarbonization, energy efficiency, the fact that energy efficiency actually saves money and is not expensive, the fact that, for example, nuclear energy takes decades to build and it is more expensive if you include all the costs also for decommission, etc. So all these conversations, I've heard so many of them, and the emissions are rising. So I don't have a simple answer because dealing with an additional layer of energy insecurity currently in Ukraine, there is a constant debate about quick versus sustainable. And when we talk about reconstruction, that is exactly the tripping stone, basically, of the civil society and the experts and the scientists and the governments, and also the municipalities and the members of parliament who feel responsible for people not having access to energy here and now, and especially rebuilding the cities. So this is a continuous debate. I don't think that the energy security of Europe is possible without including Ukraine in the equation. As I mentioned, the electricity grid is connected, and also Ukraine has a huge potential for providing electricity for Europe. And this is also the hydrogen discussions we've been having for the past couple of years with the governments are of proof of that, so that the Ukraine can actually become a good partner in stabilizing European energy security, and not having to build any new fossil fuel infrastructure in the future, to having to pay for that with human lives and with so many more millions and billions of dollars because of the catastrophes that they would cause.
And a quick footnote here, what is the status of Zaporizhzhia in terms of safety, producing electricity, and how delicate the whole thing is?
Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is occupied by Russian forces. There is a constant threat of a catastrophe happening. We all have kind of leaflets that say what to do in case of in case of a nuclear catastrophe. And obviously the electricity production is not at its full, and is not going to the Ukrainian grid. So it is a kind of a hanging knife until it is deoccupied and until it is solved. We don't really know. But the level of the water, from what I've recently read, because of the explosion at Kakhovka Dam made by Russians, so the level of water is currently enough to sustain the cooling. Mm-hmm, yeah, but it is a constant situation.
All right, well look, we've got 4 minutes to go, and there are 4 of you left to give your wind up. I'd like to put to you, quoting the IEA from a year ago, a shock of unprecedented breadth and complexity. Is there a danger of complacency of unprecedented breadth and complexity, given where we are today, compared to what Europe might be facing in the coming 6 to 9 months? Dejan.
Sorry, what is complacency?
Self-satisfaction.
I think that the awareness is, no, I don't see big risk out of that. So I think that we are somehow good prepared for future, and I don't fear huge problems in next 18 months, especially compared to the feeling and to the situation that was 1 year ago. So I think that we are much better set than 1 year ago.
Bart.
Yeah, I think we should not forget that, of course, there was some good policy in place, but we were also very lucky that we didn't have a tough winter, so to say, the last winter. So I think with that in mind, I think we could be much better prepared and aware of what the situation was. It's not only because of good policy, it's also because we had a lot of luck.
Anna.
Well, I think, as I say, energy security is not just about physical interruption, but it's about affordability of prices. I think, as Bart was saying about the Australian potential strike leading to a total spike in prices, shows that we will have extremely volatile year. It means that the prices will definitely be higher than expected. I think there is a potential for, as if we're not as lucky, and I don't believe in luck always following you, so I think relying on luck 2 years in a row, and I think the most is a bit, well, fortunate, maybe we'll be lucky. But I think the key point is that that luck has to continue until 2027. So that's a lot of luck.
Tina, is luck a good policy for government?
No, I believe in responsible and qualitative policymaking. It's a process. It's not a, I mean, it's an ongoing process. We have to grow as we go. I'm keeping optimistic that in Europe, we will have primarily responsible politicians with a joint European vision for a green transition, for a climate neutral future. And by believing in that, I also keep my hopes up that if there is a challenge coming our way, we will effectively address it.
Thanks, Tina. Is there anything you want to add, Olga, from your Ukraine perspective? Quick.
I would just remind that, as I said, the security is not about hoping that nothing bad will happen, and It is about being prepared, and I hope that the people at this panel actually, I know that they are doing their work well to be prepared and for any kind of level of danger that could come to Europe, whether it's a natural disaster or a conflict or a market problem, that we could do it again, meaning to respond to the crisis.
Well, thank you all 5 of you. Let me just tell you, we could have been in a much worse situation. It's stable, but there's no guarantee of what lies ahead. You will make your own decision, but I wouldn't say go ahead and think it's all wonderfully rosy and things are returning to where they were. That's my assessment, and thank you very much indeed. The Foreign Minister is going to formally close the BSF, so from here, just head outside the door. But thank you all 5 of you.